$1.2 billion. 98 people dead. 12 floors of a beachfront condominium in Surfside, Florida, gone in under 2 seconds while most residents slept. Champlain Towers South was not a crumbling ruin. It was a functioning, occupied residential building, and the people inside it had paid millions of dollars for the privilege. Engineers had visited, reports had been written. The specific, documented danger had been identified, put in writing, and delivered to the people responsible for fixing it. That was in October of 2018. The building stood for nearly 3 more years. Then, on June 24, 2021, it did not. This is not a story about a building that failed without warning. It is a story about what happens when a warning is received, acknowledged, debated, budgeted for, and then set aside until there is nothing left to set aside. The engineer who wrote that warning is named Frank Morabito. His firm, Morabito Consultants, was hired to inspect the building as part of its required 40-year recertification process. What he found in that inspection, and what happened to his report over the 3 years that followed, is the story of why 98 people died in their sleep on a Tuesday morning in Florida. Champlain Towers South opened in 1981. It was a 12-story beachfront condominium in Surfside, a small town just north of Miami Beach with 136 units, a rooftop pool, and direct ocean access. Developer Nathan Reiber and his team built 3 Champlain Towers in the area using the same design team, architect William Friedman and structural engineers Brighterman, Gerardo, and Associates. Units ranged from modest 2-bedroom layouts to multi-million-dollar oceanfront penthouses. For 4 decades, the building was exactly what it appeared to be, a luxury address in one of the most desirable stretches of coastline in the United States. What it was not, and had never been from the day construction was completed, was properly built. The pool deck of Champlain Tower South was poured flat. This sounds like a minor detail. It is not. Standard engineering practice and building code requirements call for concrete slabs beneath outdoor pool areas to be sloped slightly so that water drains away rather than pooling. A flat slab means water sits. Water sitting on concrete day after day, year after year, degrades the waterproofing membrane beneath it. When that membrane fails, water reaches the structural concrete below. Water in structural concrete corrodes the steel, reinforcing bars inside it. Corroded rebar expands, cracking the concrete around it further. It is a slow process, and an invisible one, until it is not. Frank Morabito would later call the flat pool deck a major error in the original design. The National Institute of Standards and Technology's investigation, which has been running since June of 2021 and had not published its final report as of the date of this video, found something more damning still. The pool deck's structural design failed to meet building code strength requirements from the beginning. In some areas, according to federal investigators, the design provided less than half of the required structural strength, and the construction deviated even from those inadequate plans. Reinforcing bars were spaced farther apart than specified, and column reinforcement did not overlap sufficiently to provide the required load capacity. The building that opened in 1981 was, by federal investigators' preliminary findings, weaker than the building codes required, and weaker still than its own below-code design called for. This is what Frank Morabito walked into in 2018. Morabito Consultants was hired by the Champlain Towers South Condominium Association to conduct the inspection required for the building's 40-year recertification under Miami-Dade County rules, a process enacted after Hurricane Andrew in 1992 that required detailed structural and electrical review of older buildings. Morabito was a structural engineer with nearly 4 decades of experience. His field survey report was dated October 2018. What he found was extensive. The report documented abundant cracking and spalling of concrete columns, beams, and walls throughout the underground parking garage. It noted exposed, deteriorating rebar in multiple locations. The waterproofing beneath the pool deck and entrance drive had failed, and that failure was causing what Morabito described as major structural damage to the concrete structural slab below. Repairs that had been attempted previously using epoxy injection into the cracks had not held. New cracks were radiating outward from the originally patched areas. Morabito estimated the cost of the repairs needed at that time at $9.1 million. His warning was specific. Failure to replace the waterproofing in the near future will cause the extent of the concrete deterioration to expand exponentially. That word was in the report. The people who received it read it. The report was delivered to the Champlain Towers South Condominium Association in late 2018. What happened next is, in many ways, the true subject of this video. Nothing happened. Not immediately, not in the months that followed, not in 2019, not in 2020. A $9.1 million repair estimate sat in a file. The Condo Association's reserve fund, according to a separate financial analysis conducted in 2020 by a firm called Association Reserves, held $706,000. The same analysis recommended the association maintain nearly $10.3 million in reserves to cover necessary repairs. The gap between what was held and what was needed was not a rounding error. It was a structural financial failure that mirrored the structural engineering failure happening beneath the pool deck. Florida law at the time allowed condominium associations to vote to waive reserve contributions. This was a legal tool widely used across the state that permitted boards to defer the financial obligations tied to future maintenance. The Champlain Towers South board used it. Rather than building toward the reserves their own financial analysis said they needed, the association voted year after year to waive those contributions. The money that should have been accumulating for repairs was not accumulated. The repairs that Morabito said needed to happen in the near future did not happen. In 2020, the association hired Morabito's firm again, this time to produce a full repair and restoration plan. The scope had grown and more systems were implicated. The $9.1 million estimate was already outdated. In April of 2021, 10 weeks before the building fell, Condo Board President Gene Wodnicki sent a letter to all unit owners. The letter was first published by the Wall Street Journal and widely reported. Its language was unambiguous. Wodnicki wrote that the concrete deterioration is accelerating. She said the roof situation got much worse. She noted that the observable damage in the underground garage has gotten significantly worse since the initial inspection. The estimated repair cost, she told residents, had risen from $9.1 million to $15 million. She explained why. New problems had been found, costs had increased, and the scope had expanded. She wrote that they had discussed, debated, and argued for years. That statement acknowledged everything that had not happened since 2018. The board voted to approve a $15 million special assessment on unit owners. Roof repair contractors began work in April. Plans for the structural concrete restoration, the repair Morabito had identified as urgent 3 years earlier, were still being solicited. The work had not started. At 1:22 in the morning on June 24, 2021, the northeast wing of Champlain Towers South collapsed. According to analysis of alarm system records and eyewitness accounts by NIST investigators, the pool deck had begun to fail at least 7 minutes earlier. In the weeks before the collapse, signs of active structural distress had been accumulating in the same area. A sliding glass door that came off its frame, a horizontal crack in a planter wall, a gate that had shifted and could no longer be opened, water leaking from the garage ceiling and increasing dramatically in the hours before the building fell. 98 people died. The building was in the midst of the repair process that the Morabito report had called for in 2018. There are 3 parties whose responsibility the litigation and the federal investigation have now documented. Each of them has a defensible position. Each of those positions has a complicating fact. Morabito Consultants says it did its job. The firm was hired to inspect the building and produce a report, and it produced a detailed report. It identified major structural damage, described the deterioration accurately, estimated the repair costs, and delivered its findings to the people responsible for acting on them. In a post-collapse statement, the firm said it had provided detailed findings and recommendations nearly 3 years ago regarding the structural repairs needed to ensure the safety of the residents and the public. All of that is true. The complicating fact is this. The Morabito report, for all its specificity about deterioration and exponential expansion, did not certify the building as unsafe. It did not state that residents' lives were in danger. It did not trigger any mandatory notification to the town of Surfside. The recertification process required a certification that the building was structurally safe. Morabito's report did not provide that certification and did not flag to town authorities why it could not. The lawsuit alleged the firm should have done both. Morabito consultants settled for $16 million. There was no admission of wrongdoing. The Champlain Towers South Condominium Association says it relied on experts, followed advice, and was working through a legitimate process for an enormous and expensive repair. The board was not populated with engineers. The association hired structural engineers to tell them what the building needed, and it relied on those engineers. It acknowledges in its own court filings that its reliance was misplaced. The board approved a $15 million assessment. It had engaged contractors. The complicating fact is the 3-year gap between the Morabito report and the moment any structural repair work began. Jean Wadnicki's own letter, written in April of 2021, contains the word years, an acknowledgement embedded in the document itself. The association's reserve fund held $706,000 when the recommended floor was $10.3 million, because the board had voted legally and repeatedly to waive contributions. Every one of those votes was a decision to defer the problem. The town of Surfside and Florida's broader regulatory framework enabled both of these failures without requiring either party to stop. Town officials said the 40-year recertification process was working as designed. The process identified issues and the building was addressing them. What the process did not require was action within a defined time frame. It did not require the Morabito report to be submitted to the town. It did not require escalation if repairs were deferred. Florida state law at the time explicitly allowed associations to waive the reserve contributions that would have funded those repairs. When a Surfside official attended a condo board meeting shortly after the Morabito report was delivered and told residents the building was in very good shape, that statement came from a regulatory system that had no mechanism to contradict it. The $15 million repair program was not the fix. It was approved too late, started too late, and according to the National Institute of Standards and Technology's preliminary findings, addressed only the surface-level deterioration caused by water intrusion. It did not address the design understrength and construction defects that had been present since the building was completed in 1981. Even a fully executed, on-time repair program would have been patching a building whose concrete had never been strong enough to begin with. The legal settlement totaled $1.2 billion, approved by Miami-Dade Circuit Court Judge Michael Hansman in June 2022. It was the largest construction disaster settlement in American history at the time. More than 25 entities contributed. The largest single payment, $517.5 million, came not from the engineering firms or the condo association, but from Securitas, the building's security company. The developers of the adjacent luxury condo tower, 87 Park, contributed roughly $400 million combined through their insurers. Morabito consultants paid $16 million. No individual was ever criminally charged. The federal investigation by NIST remains technically open as of the date of this video. Its final report, including formal findings and recommendations for building codes and standards, had not yet been published, more than 4 years after the collapse. Florida's legislative response to Surfside was mandatory safety inspections for all condo buildings over 30 years old. Every building in that category was required to complete a structural inspection and file a reserve study by December 31st, 2024. The inspections have been happening. What they have found across thousands of buildings across the state is deterioration. Special assessments for discovered repairs have reached as high as $200,000 per unit owner. The Florida condo market has seen inventory surge 65% year over year as owners try to exit before the bills arrive. A state legislator representing Miami-Dade told her constituents in so many words not to buy a condominium in Florida right now. In May of 2025, the Florida legislature extended the inspection deadline by a full year to December 31st, 2025, citing the financial pressure on condo associations struggling to fund the process. Beginning in 2026, associations are supposed to lose the ability to waive reserve contributions. the same legal mechanism that allowed Champlain's board to defer repairs for years. That provision is still under legislative pressure. Frank Morabito's firm settled for $16 million and continues to operate. Morabito Consultants is still conducting structural inspections. The pattern Frank Morabito documented in his 2018 report, Warnings Issued, Costs Assessed, Action Deferred, is playing out right now across thousands of Florida buildings, with the same financial logic, the same institutional inertia, and the same legal framework that made it possible the first time. The question is not whether other buildings have the same problems Champlain Towers South had. The inspections are finding them. The question is whether the same decisions that killed 98 people in Surfside will be made again, quietly, legally, and with no one required to stop them. If you want to know which buildings come next, subscribe. We'll find them.